Right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's South Georgia Association event. Before we get things properly underway, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Martin Collins. I'm one of the committee members of the South Georgia Association. And this evening, I'm going to be just hosting this evening's presentation by Norman Court, who's here with us. Norman's from the Viola Trust, and he's going to be telling us about the Virtual Viola project. Before I actually hand over to Norman to make a start, I'm sure many of you online joining us this evening are already members of the South Georgia Association. But for those who aren't members, and this evening's event is open to non-members, I would just like to encourage those with a real interest in South Georgia to join the association. We're a very friendly bunch, and we organise events such as this where we sort of share our thoughts and ideas about South Georgia. And we also feed into some of the consultations that the South Georgia government have about the future of the island as well. So it's a very busy organisation, and really good for anybody who is genuinely interested in South Georgia. So yeah, please do join us, and there will be future events with the South Georgia theme coming up later. Well, next year I think will probably be the next event. Anyway, what I'd like to do next is just to introduce you to Norman. Norman sort of had a previous career. I think most recent in his working life was managing director of Falcon Cycles. But since retiring, Norman's had developed a real interest in the Viola, which was a steam trawler that was one of the last remaining vessels still intact that saw action in World War One. For those who visited South Georgia, you will have gone into Grytviken, and almost certainly you will have seen the Viola, or the Diaz, as it was later called, just on the shore in Grytviken Cove. And there have been various sort of discussions and initiatives about trying to bring the vessel back to the UK. But Norman's going to tell us about the Virtual Viola project, which he's been very much involved in. So I will hand across to Norman, and he will introduce himself and then tell us all about the Virtual Viola project.
Okay, well, thank you, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Norman Court, and I act as the project manager for the Viola Trust. And it's good to have the opportunity to sit here tonight and to talk about a lady that's come to occupy a big part of my heart over the last few years in the Viola. One or two of you will have seen Rob Robinson, or Dr. Rob Robinson, who's a maritime historian who's spoken to the association before about Viola and the sort of colourful life that it's experienced. What I like to do this evening is just take a slightly different angle on that. Rather than telling you totally about the Viola, because there's a film that will do that nicely, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background about what the Trust has been trying to do, what its objectives were in respect to the Viola, and then lead into the film that we have at the end. So we'll start, if we can, and see just what comes our way in terms of Viola and her background. Right. Now, Viola was actually a bit of a celebrity from the day she was born, so to speak. It was built in 1906 in Beverley in East Yorkshire, and it was one of a fleet of 50 steam trawlers and 5 high-speed cutters. An interesting point, really, in that when they were all built, it was very much at the behest of the benefits of the railway system. You know, the railway system was building in the UK, and it gave access to fresh food. It meant that we could move fresh food around the country very effectively, and that's reflected really in the Viola story, because she was one of this great armada built here, these 50 steam trawlers that were built, and 5 high-speed cutters, and they were placed out in the North Sea in what were called boxing fleets, and they stayed out there for maybe 5 weeks, and the high-speed cutter would come out each day and take their boxed fish results from the previous day, bring it back to Billingsgate, and it would end up being able to move around the country and end up on every street corner in the fish and chip shops. So it's interesting that the dimension of that market for fish and chips was so big, because you can see on the screen there that the equivalent cost of that expenditure in 1906 now would be £49 million. So, you know, this was just one of several boxing fleets that were out there fishing the North Sea continuously. So it's possible, you know, it's possible to get a feeling for just how many fish and chips were being eaten back in 1906 simply by looking at those numbers. She was called Viola, and I apologise if I use the name Viola all night rather than Diaz. She was renamed Diaz at one stage, but we tend to refer to her by her birth name. And Charles Hellier, the guy who commissioned this great expenditure, he was actually something of a Shakespearean nut, to be honest. Everything that he owned, he gave a Shakespearean name to, it seems, and you know, even his children had Shakespearean names. So Viola seems to be the right thing to use as we talk this evening. The Viola Trust was set up originally in 2016, but it was preceded by a group of people in 2004, principally from Grimsby on the southern bank of the Humber, who were interested in this fantastic life that Viola had experienced and wanted to look at bringing her back to a home port or a home area of the Humber. That didn't really get through to fruition, and it all went quiet until 2016, when the Viola Trust was formed as a charitable trust. And it was interesting how it was formed. I mentioned Dr. Rob Robinson, who's spoken to the association before, and Rob was giving a talk in just before 2016, generally about trawling, and he dropped onto the Viola and gave a thorough discussion about it. One of the people in the audience, and he made comment in that discussion about how the thought had been to try and bring her back to a home port of Hull. One of the guys in the audience was a gentleman who was the owner of a tug company, a towing company, and he tapped Rob on the shoulder at the end of the presentation and said, look, if you want to bring this thing back, I can tell you how to do it. You obviously can't sail it back, an old boat like that, but I can tell you how to do it. And so the two of them got together, and the Viola Trust was brought into effect, and given a series of key aims. The first one was to repatriate her to a home port. And that's got some controversy in it already. I'll touch on that later. But then to refurbish her as a heritage asset. She was a vessel that was, well, she's actually the oldest, not one of the oldest, but the oldest steam trawler in existence with her engines intact. So there's not many of her left. She was one of the first, because when she was built in 1906, that great thrust of purchase of steam trawlers was seen as switch from from sail to steam trawling. So she was one of the first steam trawlers, and here she is now one of the last. Wanted to refurbish her as a heritage asset, and at the same time develop maritime craft skills for apprentices who could come along and learn how to refurbish the vessel as part of their formal apprenticeship. We wanted also to use her to improve the educational understanding of the trawling life in the early 1900s and the general social conditions and the conditions that people worked under and lived under at that time. And of course, we wanted to promote awareness of South Georgia. I say, of course, and there is a reason why I mention South Georgia, or why I mention promoting awareness of South Georgia. And it's part of that original point about bringing her back from the port. The plan that we had a series of points here. The first one was to try and gain permission from the government of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands to remove her. Now, this is arguably a good idea and a bad idea. I obviously sit in the camp of the Viola Trust, who wanted to bring her back to her home port, because fundamentally she was the essence of what Hull was built on. There were something like 8,000 seamen died in vessels of a similar nature on Hull. She's almost part of the DNA of the city. And so I could see a strong argument for bringing her back to her home port and be displayed and let people understand and share the heritage. Having said that, equally, it's possible to recognise that there's a legitimate claim that she should be left where she is. She spent half her life now birthed in Grytviken. She encapsulates the whaling station that Grytviken is renowned to have been. Shows how a part of history operated, brings in funding from the cruise lines that travel across from America to see an old whaling station. So you could actually argue that she's equally part of the DNA of Grytviken. So the first task obviously was to make sure that we had permission to bring her back, and after some discussion, that was given. And given in writing, but one of the conditions that was agreed, or one of the points that was agreed, was that the Viola Trust would do all it can to promote awareness of South Georgia in whatever guise it comes along. So that was the first page of the plan, and assuming that went well, which it did, that the permission was granted, she was going to be brought back on a heavy lift vessel. This is like a piggyback on a bigger boat that she could be lifted onto the back of and brought back. She wasn't going to be ever attempted to sail back. She was far too old for that. We wanted to link with local schools by using online cameras that would show the schools where she was, how she was retrieved, what parts of the world she was in, talk about the various conditions in that part of the world, and really expand the awareness of geographic and economic situations as she came all the way back. There were 14 apprenticeship roles that were going to be taken on, and the specifications we drew up for these to put in place so that we could appoint 14 maritime engineers, marine engineers, who would learn their skills in refurbishing the old vessel. When refurbished, she would then be put into a dry dock for public access, and we would pass across to Hull City Council the ownership of the vessel with the funds to maintain her for quite a period beyond that. As we say, the intention was to gain mass publicity and exposure for South Georgia in that process, and there's little doubt that had we been able to organise to bring this vessel halfway around the world, or from the southern hemisphere up to the north here, it would have got enormous publicity. But at that point then, the Viola Trust would cease to exist. And that was the plan that we set about doing. As with all plans, there are difficult things to contend with. Some of the obvious ones are that the years take a toll. And you can see that on that slide on the screen, it's got a label on the top saying Solis Marine Consultants. These are salvage experts. So these are guys who we sent down to look and to see, the best ways of what can be done and how it could be done. And in the early days, you can see it was a rather sorry sight. There was very heavily waterlogged, both the Viola, which is in the foreground on that left-hand shot, and the Albatross, which is the one behind her. It was necessary to refloat her, to degunk her, basically, remove the oil and bits and pieces from inside her, and a relationship was formed with Chilean boat builders to come across and do that remedial work that's spoken about there. The point of bringing her back was going to be handled by piggybacking her onto a heavy lift ship. Now, there were two ways of doing this, and this is the fairly straightforward one that one might expect, where you run straps around, lift her from a crane onto the deck of a larger vessel and bring her home. But, we're talking about here about a craft that was built in 1906 and has been sitting in the water, for nearly 120 years. And the danger of lifting her with straps, even if they're only marginally wrongly placed, was that she would break her back. So what we preferred to look at was a system of lifting her, which was based on a fabricated cradle. And the cradle there would be designed, obviously, to be bespoke to her. The cradle would be sunk out in the bay. Viola would be floated out above her, and then as the cradle was lifted, it would bring both things and put them back on the deck, and she could then steam north and come home. And that was the process that we were looking to undertake. But as with all things in life, it was incredibly expensive. The cost of repatriation, that's simply getting her on the back of that heavy lift vessel and getting her, let's say, back to her home port of Hull, was, as it says there, 1.3 million and rising all the time. The actual refurbishment work, that the apprentices and the shipyards would work on, was approaching £2 million in cost. And we were wrestling with the VAT because it seemed ludicrous that you have to pay VAT in this. And maybe there were some ways of doing it if we could find someone else who would pay the funds and claim the VAT back. But on the basis that that wouldn't work out, there was nearly £500,000 in VAT. So on the cost that we were working with originally, we were looking at 3.5 million and then an annual maintenance cost of 90,000. Now we were raising the funds not too bad. The refurbishment, we had 90% of that cost covered. The VAT, as I say, we were trying to negotiate as to what could be legally done to escape that VAT penalty. But the maintenance costs we had fully covered. But the repatriation cost, we were only about halfway through finding the money for that. And the reason was that anyone who was interested in the vessel and the story that we told of her would say, I think it's a great idea, wonderful, yeah. And when you get her back, then I'll put money in the pot. But nobody wanted to take the risk, perhaps not surprisingly, of bringing a 110, 120-year-old vessel back that might, who knows, break in half as it was being lifted, or may roll off and degenerate as it in transit, so to speak. So basically, that first half of the money was very, very hard to come by. Just a quick scan through the kind of logistics that we wanted to wrestle, or had to wrestle with. And to be honest, these became quite enjoyable to try and work in. They look horrendous, but they're not. Just going through them, the first thing we had to do, of course, and this being the South Georgia Association, I would think it would be one of the first things you would think of, and that is what harm or what impact on the environment would removing this vessel from the shoreline have? Is there anything living there, anything growing there? Would it cause any kind of problems? And so we had to get specialists in, and they came across from New Zealand, as it happens, to look at the environmental impact, have a full assessment, and identify, what could and couldn't be done. We wanted to float her out into the bay, as I say. Well, you can't just do that. You've got to patch the holes. I mean, the old girl's been sitting in Grytviken for 60 years, as near as damn it. And along the wind and water line, there are holes appearing. Not massive holes, but bigger than the holes that you might find in your jumper, that's for sure. And, as one of my colleagues always reminds us, the tides flowing in and then flowing out again, then flowing in and flowing out again, carry with it little bits of mica, sand, gravel, whatever else. And it's like sandpaper. So for 60 years, it's had this effect of water coming in through any weak spots and going out and coming in and out. In effect, it's been sandpapered. The holes have been sandpapered, gently, but sandpapered nonetheless, for 60 years. So these would have to be patched. To get them patched, we'd have to bring in the Chileans. They'd have to be fully self-equipped, as you know. There's no facilities there for them. And they also would have to make good the shoreline and identify a means of protecting the adjacent vessel, which is the Albatross, because there was a fear that if Viola was moved, then Albatross itself may become unstable. So that was quite a lot of work to be done. The harness was being built in South Africa, and the reason for that is that there are not very many of these heavy lift vessels available, and they work on a rotation. A lot of them work on a rotation around the world, and so you've got to build this harness where the heavy lift vessel can collect it on its normal sailing route, let's say, because otherwise, if you're taking it out of its normal route, you're boosting up costs quite horrendously. So the harness had to be built, and it had to be built with laser measurement, obviously to the blueprints and to the shape and contour of the hull, to make sure that no damage was caused when it was lifted up from underneath the old girl, and she was lifted onto the deck of the heavy lift vessel. This all had to work at the right timing. We wanted it to be towards the end of the southern summer and just before the beginning of the northern hemisphere spring, to try and get the best tide conditions that wouldn't that wouldn't cause us any major problems. And the cost of getting this wrong in terms of timing, all these people, the Chilean has been on time, the harness being on time, the heavy lift vessel being able to collect it on time, the conditions being good enough to be able to float her out into the bay and to lift her on, all that had to be on time, because the cost of missing these times or extending the hire of the heavy lift vessel equated to around £40,000 per day charge. So you get your logistics wrong, and you can see the bills climbing before your very eyes. In terms of communications, we wanted to add a complication, which we thought was valuable, which was to have this online camera based on the heavy lift vessel, so we could have a live reporting back into the schools and the school's curriculum, certainly in East Yorkshire and Hull, to give them a day-by-day progress of what's happening. And then finally, we had to time in the dock availability. The Associated British Ports have got a big facility here in Hull, and we had to time all this at a time when they could confirm that we'd have quayside location here in Hull that we could use for maybe 12 months. And that needed to be timed in, obviously, for when the heavy lift vessel brought the old girl back. So that was all working nicely. And after that logistic was established and we got her located, the final plan was to put her into public exhibition in a dry dock in the centre of Hull. And the dock we were talking about actually is the dock that's next door to the dock where HMS Bounty was built. So it's in a part of Hull that's quite interesting. And it was the dock that was used for the first of the transportation of criminals to Australia. So it was a dock in itself that had quite a bit of history. In fact, I do remember at one stage at one of the dinners that we held to raise money, looking through the names of all the poor souls who went on the first transportations, and there were people on there for young lads of 16 and 17 years of age for stealing handkerchiefs. So, maybe we shouldn't have sent them. We'd have had a rugby side that was a bit better than what we've got, I think, if we'd kept them at home, perhaps. But anyway, that was where it was due to be shown, and that was fine. Things were on schedule. It was tricky, but it was absorbing, as you can see, to try and get all these elements together. But then along came COVID, and COVID changed everything. COVID put something like 1.25 to 1.5 million instantly on the bill, because one of the heavy lift vessel, and there's a few of them going around the world, dropped out altogether. Prices rose instantly. Heavy diesel fuel went up by a ridiculous amount. And suddenly we found ourselves looking not at 3.5 million, but something like 5.5 million pound to recover this old vessel. Now, I could have had a new one built. I could have had one built up in the northeast of England, to be honest, and they would build it for for under £2 million. But you can't build heritage, can you? I mean, heritage is born into or is created over time. So that was never any attraction to us. We had to in the end accept that at that level there were 2 or 3 big questions coming up. The first one was, could we raise the money? And it was doubtful that we could. And the second one really was almost a moral question. Can you really justify, even with this particular stage of history that the old vessel represented, can you really justify £5 million in the modern economy where people are suffering from who knows what privations? Can you really justify being able to do it? So we had to acknowledge that the principal objective was going to fail, and we were going to have to put our hands up and say, sorry, we can't do it. We tried our best, but we failed. And that was going to create huge disappointment. I have to tell you that this amazing craft draws interest from all around the world. There are events that we've held to raise cash whilst we've been trying to pursue this project. And some of the projects have been fairly simple things like producing calendars, for instance, with pictures of vessels and pictures of details of Viola on. And we sold out of these twice over 2 years. And we had letters from people in France, people in America, people in Chile, people in Norway. In fact, in this last week or so, I'm still getting letters. I've had one from some boat builders in Sydney in Australia, and another one from marine engineers in Kenya. The interest and the involvement of people and families, of uncles, of granddads, of fathers that have either served on Viola or have been aware of her, or have even visited her. It's been enormous. And, we have to recognise that there's going to be a huge disappointment for all these people who we have built up an expectation with. In addition to that, we're letting it go just means we lose the heritage awareness, the heritage opportunity. Many of you may know that in Hull at the moment, there's a huge project going on where the city is repositioning itself as Yorkshire's port city. And that's an accurate description. And it means that there's been something like 40 to 50 million pounds being spent on refurbishing the town centre, opening the dry docks further. There are 3 dry docks. I talked about 2 of them. There's a third one. And in the third dry dock is going to be the Arctic Corsair, which itself has been refurbished as a modern trawling vessel and made available for public to visit and to walk around. That's a huge undertaking. And what we had hoped and the excitement we had was that within 100 meters of the Arctic Corsair would have been the Viola. And you could sort of walk 100 years in 100 yards almost, in whichever direction you went. But that sort of thing's all lost as an asset, as the heritage awareness, and of course the apprenticeships, which we all need to see new young engineers coming through right across the whole spectrum. And so that was a great sadness. And I suppose finally you could say the other element of this was that there would be a waste of thousands of hours, quite literally, of effort and research and input and enthusiasm, all gone. And that's what lose it would mean. We couldn't bring it back physically. So we thought, okay, plan B has got to be to bring her back virtually. And to bring her back virtually, we were very lucky. The association's own past chief, Professor David Drury, who was the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Hull, had a colleague, or an ex-colleague, who had moved up to Glasgow University, Glasgow School of Art, and was specialising in virtual reality, photogrammetry, laser technology. And we talked with him, and Glasgow said, yeah, we can take what material you've got. We can take what material you've got, stills, videos, whatever, and we can create a story of a life that will bring her back virtually, if not physically. And so that's what we've done. And when I press the next slide, you'll see an 11-minute film that we've produced, which may well be a new step in the process of conservation of things like old vessels. It's an 11-minute story. it tells the tale of viola, and it's never been seen anywhere. I did think about coming in a dicky bow tonight and a special jacket, because I have to tell you that at this moment in time, you are sitting in front of the world premiere, no less, of this film, which will be handed to Hull Museum's Maritime Museum shortly. So you're about to see here the world premiere of the Virtual Viola. I hope you enjoy it.
Leave Yorkshire's port city Hull, sail south for 8,000 miles, steer east as you reach the tip of South America, continue beyond the Falklands, and there you will reach South Georgia. Travel on to the once bustling whaling station of Grytviken, and there you will find an old lady, well over 100 years of age, Shakespearean in name, Yorkshire by birth. The incredible story of the steam trawler Viola, from supplying chip shops and sinking Great War U-boats to its role as a spark to the Falklands War. Viola's story begins in the thriving East Yorkshire town of Beverley, from where, in 1906, the trawler was launched, floated down the river and fitted out in Queenstock, Hull, before joining the new Hellier boxing fleet, working the treacherous North Sea fishing grounds, helping to satisfy demand for the UK's new, soon-to-become traditional dish of fish and chips. Boxing fleets were organised groups of trawlers, working far out in those North Sea fishing grounds for weeks on end. Sorting each day's catch into boxes, then rowing them across to a fast steam cutter, which conveyed the day's catch to Billingsgate at high speed. Transferring the fish was a perilous task, which took place whatever the weather. Limbs and lives were frequently lost in this fearsome process.
And how often would you go alongside the cutter?
Oh, every day. Well, twice a day you go to one foot of empty boxes, and then the next one you go board your feet. You go board your feet. And then in the summertime, when it's hot weather, you know, you go twice a day. Morning and afternoon, you day it all, so you stay on deck all night, see?
Yeah. Oh, you wouldn't fish for a few days or anything, you'd just...
Oh, no, every day, no, except in case you was going with the cook and then they'd put it nice, you see.
Yeah,
He used to leave the fleet every morning. It was a feat, I'll tell you. He was expert boatman, no mistake.
Viola herself was suitably designed and built for this purpose. Transferring the catch daily meant less fish storage room required, more space for coal stocks and longer tours at sea. At her owner's insistence, she had a bridge open to all weathers to stop the men getting soft. As well as basic sleeping and eating space, and a sturdy profile, capable of taking almost every kind of weather to be found in this hostile environment. The triple expansion steam engine, fitted here by Amos and Smith of Hull, was a significant advancement in marine propulsion, reusing the steam in 3 stages to create a highly efficient method of power. At the outbreak of World War I, Viola, along with many others, was taken into wartime service by the Admiralty. Initially fitted out with a 3-pounder gun, which was later increased in calibre, she was allocated a role patrolling the waters off the Shetland Islands for 2 years and then the northeast coast of England. The armed trawler thus spent over 4 years on anti-submarine activities on the front line of the maritime war. During her later years on Admiralty service, she was fitted with the hydrophone listening devices, a precursor to the electronic listening devices in use in modern times. Around this same time, Viola was also equipped with depth charges, which were another dimension in the new wartime technology. By now, the armed trawler and its crew were quite formidable opponents for the German U-boats. During more than 4 years on the maritime front line, Viola had numerous encounters with U-boats and played a key role in the sinking of 2 such vessels. Her skipper for much of the war was Charles Allen, who was also mentioned in dispatches for assisting other distressed vessels and attacking a U-boat, which was trying to sink a Norwegian merchant ship off the Farne Islands. Viola survived, even thrived in wartime, much more than many of her sister ships and fellow mariners. An end to wartime service saw a string of major changes for this gallant little craft. Sold into Norwegian ownership, she was initially used for fishing, but was then adapted for whaling off the coast of Africa, before being sold again to a commercial enterprise established in Buenos Aires by the Norwegian whaler and explorer Carl Anton Larsen of Sandefjord. From her base in Grytviken, and by now renamed Dias, she spent time as a supply vessel and a survey craft, carrying the crew to make the first cinematographic recording of the complete coastline of South Georgia. In 1960, Viola came back under British ownership, but still worked a few more years from the whaling station harbour at Grytviken, where she was finally laid up after commercial whaling and sealing operations there ceased in the mid-1960s. For most, this would be a deserved retirement, well earned, and a quiet demise at the end of an eventful life. But Viola had much more to come than anyone might have guessed. On the 19th of March 1982, a group of Argentinian scrap dealers illegally entered South Georgia. Amongst the scrap they were to cut up was Viola, now Diaz, and 2 other old craft laid up with her. Instead of cutting up scrap, the dealers raised the Argentinian flag. And so began the conflict, now referred to as the Falklands War. Ironically, the old girl, whilst a silent witness to the British retaking of South Georgia, saw 9 vessels from her home port of Hull come south as part of the task force. Viola thus saw action in both Great War and the Falklands War. Viola sits not much more than a stone's throw away from the grave of Ernest Shackleton, the renowned explorer whose days ended in this wild and beautiful part of the world. Perhaps a final irony lies in the fact that some of his chosen key crewmen were also Hull mariners. The magnetism of the South Atlantic to Hull's men of the sea pulls strongly.
I hope you got a feeling of why Viola is special, and you know, the fact that while she may not be leaving Grytviken and coming back to Hull, the presence of her will be felt, hopefully, for a long time to come. And as it says on that final slide there, yeah, we failed in the efforts. We tried to move mountains, and we were unable to do. But I suppose the good news is we did move one mountain slightly, and that is that during the course of all our contacts with the government of South Georgia, we were able to rename one of the mountains as Viola Peak. So Viola Peak now sits above the cove, which is Diaz Cove. So, you know, a name is retained there, and you know, who knows what the future brings. Thanks for doing that. I'll pass this back now to Martin.
Great, thank you very much, Norman. That was fantastic, and I mean, sorry we had to cut you off in the middle there with the film, but I think we got it back at the right place again. What I'll do now is just invite our audience to put some questions into the Q&A, and we will do our best, or I'll ask you to do your best to answer some of them. There are a couple of comments that have come in during the presentation. Trevor in Dereham, Norfolk says, sorry, but we're in the group that believes she should rest where she is in Grytviken.
Yeah, well, I think it's a legitimate point.
Yes. And Christine Burridge says, wow, I'm currently trying to do a PowerPoint presentation about a ship stranded in Stanley Harbour and deteriorating rapidly. Where do you start?
Well, I suppose we cheated and we got assistance, but we got in touch with Glasgow School of Art, and they gave us a lot of assistance, and it wasn't all charged back. Some of it was friendly assistance, pointers in the right direction, and the place they started was obviously simply to gather as much information, visual, photographic, and so on and so forth as we could. But that might be worth a contact if she's looking for a bit of help.
Yeah, thanks, Norman. We can probably put Christine in touch with you to get a little bit more advice on that.
Yeah, please.
I'd be interested to hear which vessel it is that they're looking at in Stanley Harbour. Katerine is asking, is the film available? But I think it will be made available through the Hull Museum in due course, Norman, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Actually, I mean, it's a good point to make, and that is that a copy of it has gone to the museum in Grytviken, so it will be shown in Grytviken. And the South Georgia Heritage Trust also have a copy, and that will be used to try and get the cruise vessels to take that on board. So people who are visiting Grytviken will get a little bit of information as they get close to the islands. Otherwise, it will be with the Hull museums. That opens, the new revised museum in Hull opens in spring, so it will be shown there and displayed there on a full-time basis, as well as doing the rounds of interested societies and things. But that will be primarily locally, I think. And the actual launch of it, as I say, that's the premiere tonight. The actual launch is next Wednesday, when it'll be shown to a specially selected audience involved with all these kind of places.
Yeah, thanks, Norman. And I think it is great to find out a little bit more about these vessels. I knew a little bit of the history, but not learned an awful lot more from your presentation this evening. Now, Valerie's asking, I think, again, an important question. Can further deterioration of the vessel be avoided?
That's an excellent question, and I actually did wonder whether to make a comment on this point. I think it's inevitable. I think what we're seeing is a deterioration which is inevitable, and probably economically, I don't think it'd be viable to prevent. But that does flag up a problem for the government of South Georgia and for the South Georgia Association and its aims in itself. One of our fears is that as it gets older, as it degenerates, as the holes widen, which they will do inevitably, it could pose a bit of a threat to some of the local wildlife. You know, you could have seals who are coming alongside it and ripping their skins and whatever else. And if it sinks lower, there is asbestos around the engines, which will eventually contaminate at some point. So there is a problem here for the future. Now, it's sat there for 40 years, for 60 years so far, and I think it'll be a long way in the future, but it's not something you can kick into the long grass. I think it's a very good point that's raised, and it's an issue that will need to be looked at some stage.
Thank you, Norman. I think some of that applies to the other vessels, of course, that are around there, and
Absolutely.
And the stations themselves. Now, Kearns Mason's asking, have you asked Elon Musk to give some loose change? But then Gordon Liddell, good to hear from you, Gordon. Very wonderful talk. He says he might have some archival material from the raising of the vessels, but probably not more than Lyle. And I think Lyle was credited.
Yes, he was. That's right.
And he's asking if he finds anything, would anyone be interested? I'm sure folk would be interested.
Yes, they would. And I mean, I think Rob Robinson, you know, Dr. Rob Robinson, who was referred to in the film, and I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, he is an absolute font of knowledge of historical data, and he would be very interested to be contacted with anything that emerges.
Yeah, well, Gordon was involved he was the sort of operations manager at South Georgia government quite a few years back. So
right, yeah.
He was involved in, I think, some of the initial work
You've stopped. You've stopped again on me. You stopped, Martin.
I think it might be an issue on Martin's end. We'll give him a couple of minutes to reconnect.
Yeah, okay. Was it okay from your end there, Josh? Apart from that break?
Yeah. The film went well. I think people would appreciate a link, maybe on Wednesday.
Yes.
From the whole museum. I think that'd be great.
That'd be a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, because some of the video was a little bit choppy, and it would give people a uninterrupted view.
Yes.
Of the film to sort of fully appreciate.
I think it's like a lot of these things as well. You want to watch them 2, maybe even 3 times to get the full story. You pick up something new each time.
Yeah. While Martin's off, I can continue asking some of the questions. Just give
Yeah,
him
great.
a couple of seconds to sort of get back in. Jim Hemson says if Hull are spending £45 million on a refurb of the centre, then £5 million to reparate the Viola sounds to be a possibility and a huge draw alongside the modern trawler refurb. He asks if the issue's not dead yet.
As far as we're concerned, I think it is dead. And I mean, there is a technical reason on this. The city council, when they were spending this huge amount of money refurbishing the repositioning the city, they applied for lottery funding, and lottery funding was granted to them. Now, lottery funding is very difficult. We couldn't be included in that because lottery funding can only pay out for can only contribute for vessels that are in British protected waters, British waters, and this is not classed. Believe it or not, this is not classed as being in British waters. So we got a very firm no on that. What the problem then became was that the lottery fund itself became very stretched for, I think it was slightly oversubscribed, and therefore all the projects were sat on very, very tightly, and the city council at Hull didn't dare step outside the arrangements of the lottery funding that they were getting for their big project by including us in any way, shape, or form, in case it gave the lottery fund an excuse to withdraw. So that rather complicated answer is why we got into that position.
Yeah. Hi, Martin. I just took over asking some questions in your absence. I'll
Thank
ask.
you, Josh.
That's all right. No worries. I'll ask the next one, and then you can pick up from Christine's. Is that okay? Just so you know where you are.
Yeah, I can only see one open on we had a power cut, very brief, so that was why I disappeared.
I'll,
The
um,
lights,
I'll- yeah, I can keep asking them. That's no problem.
yeah, go ahead, Josh, please do.
Brilliant. So Felix has a really good question, and being in IT, I was really interested to hear this. He says this was a fantastic film, first off, and thanks you for sharing it with us. He was wondering if the viola has ever been digitally recorded, both inside and outside, through laser scanning or photogrammetry. Sorry,
Yeah,
and is there a
photogrammetry.
plan to monitor it digitally?
Yeah, no, she hasn't been. That option was put to us by Glasgow School of Art because those are their specialities, and they were capable of doing it. But having said that, there was a cost that we couldn't really commit to because it didn't really add anything to the filming and to the position we'd taken. So when we'd reached the stage of saying this is the way we're going to go, and we went with Glasgow, we went in a way that we could do within the funds that we'd already collected because we didn't think it was morally right to carry on collecting extra cash, if you see my point. So I think he's right. I think it could be done internally and externally. It could be done very precisely. Obviously, if it's laser measurements, but we avoided going down that route consciously.
Cool.
Could I just add to that, Josh? Sorry to interrupt. There was a company called Geometry who did a whole load of laser scanning around the whaling stations back in about 2013-14. They did the interior of the whaling stations, and I have a feeling they did the Karrakatta, which is at Husvik, but I'm not sure if they did the vessels at Grytviken. I assume not, but it's worth just double checking if there is any of that
Yeah, I mean,
available.
I think certainly from what bit of information we tried to seek on this, and because the other people who were doing a lot of work were the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust, and they were working their way. I believe they're working their way around parts of South Georgia. I'm not certain, but they were actively doing this laser measurement on, and I think the work you described was probably falls into their remit. But we weren't able to get any arrangement with them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you did a digital recording, obviously that would allow it to be pretty much preserved eternally digitally. That would be really cool to see if there's anything there. And as Martin said, if it already exists in some capacity, perhaps the outside of that digital scan might be something to work with. Have you got the questions on your screen now, Martin, at all?
No, I don't for whatever reason, Josh. You will
That's
have
right.
to.
I'll continue. Okay, the next one's from Christine. She asks, she just says, please put me in touch. I'm told that the reparation efforts were made, but still researching. I know Mensenbond, the Falkland Maritime Trust said she's important. I was not thinking about the reparation. I think this is a follow-on question from Christine,
Yeah.
who's working on the salvage effort for a ship in Stanley Harbour.
Yes. Yeah. Well, certainly. I mean, if it helps, there's no problem whatsoever in you giving her my email address and her making contact, and we'll see if there's anything that we can do that might help her in her task.
Cool. And I've also got another question from Jessica, just asking and reaching out for an email contact from yourself, as she's kind of involved in this sort of thing. Would it be possible, if we gave out your email or some contact details after the event?
No problem at all. I mean, happy to do that. I can't help thinking, but this process is touching on, and I did make passing reference to it. I can't help but believe that this process is touching on perhaps an extension of the process of conservation of things like these old vessels, where time eventually is going to take away a lot of the evidence, and what we produce is, if you like, virtual evidence, as in this form. I've no doubt that the filming will get much more comprehensive than what we've done, because these things move on in leaps and bounds. But it may be that the whole process is in this is a, if you like, an example of a process that's currently in its infancy and possibly has quite a lot of road to run down.
Yeah. The last one that I've got here on my screen is a thought rather than a question from Gary Peterson.
Yes.
And he says, just looking at a photo I took of Viola in January 2020 as a tourist, it's a great shame that the lottery funding isn't available.
Yeah.
Although if the SS Great Britain could be brought back in 1970 from the Falklands, it is disappointing a much smaller vessel cannot be
Yes.
brought back more than half a century later. Would
Yeah.
need to find a Sir Jack Hayward, though.
I've got to tell you that there have been a lot of heads banged against a lot of walls here, and this whole process of why can the lottery funding not really assist here has gone all the way up through, even through the royal family. Princess Anne, for instance, is very familiar with Viola. She's been to South Georgia. She's familiar with the situation there, and she was a strong advocate of surely something could be done. And as he then lost Prince Charles, now King Charles, of course, he also banged his head against the establishment wall and came off second best and could get no movement in this. So it's a bizarre and very, particularly when you bear in mind that a war was fought down there. It seems a very strange interpretation of how things might be, but maybe it's a battle yet to be won.
Thank you so much for answering that. Yeah, so I haven't got any more questions on my screen. If anybody else would like to ask some questions, please do before we end this. But I'll hand back over to Martin if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, for stepping in there, and apologies everybody for the power cut I suffered, which disrupted things very slightly, but hopefully Josh covered that pretty seamlessly. Just a final comment, I think, from Roderick Rhys-Jones. Surely the lottery money could be restricted to work in UK waters. I mean, I think that's been the problem to a degree. It's been restricted to domestic UK and not for the overseas territories. But it would be great,
yes,
to have that, because this is something that spans both the UK and the UK overseas territories.
Yeah.
So it would seem to be a good use of lottery money. Right, just to see, there might be one more come in, and just from I think this is Bruce Mayer. How was the Virtual Viola created? Have drones been used?
It was created really by a combination of everything that we could find. Old footage, as you saw on the film, of the guys in the boxing fleet, photographic material, artistic interpretation, and drawing. We had the stuff from Lloyd's Register and people of that nature who gave us the blueprints and allowed us to. So it was created from every source that that was available to us, to be honest. And you know, that's what we see as a result of it, of what they did. I mean, it was technically it was an excellent piece of work that they did. And in terms of drone footage, yes, I've got one superb piece of drone footage that the Royal Navy took for us, because everyone has been so helpful on this. You know, the British Antarctic Survey have been helpful when we needed someone to look inside the vessel and test the waters in there when we were looking at its environmental impact assessment. And they had divers to do the new quay when they were building the new quay. The divers went into the Viola. They took us water samples. We had those assayed back at Hull. You know, so everybody's been helpful. And the Royal Navy, when they were down there on one of the visits, actually put a drone up for us and went around the harbour area, around the bank, and gave us some tremendous footage, which we have. Now all that went into this process. So there was a heck of a lot of pieces. And I sit back in admiration of the guys who actually untangled all these pieces and made the film in the way that they did.
Yeah, thanks, Norman, and quite a few thanks generally for the presentation coming through in the chat.
Oh, good.
Anna's asking, is there an ongoing charge for berthing the Viola in South Georgia? We shouldn't give the South Georgia government any ideas, really. But, I'm not sure who they'd be charging.
I'm getting rid of our interest in it in a few weeks' time, so it'll be the whole council's problem then.
And then there's Jeremy Tellowins asking, I would like to ask on another iconic vessel based in Grytviken, can anyone tell me whether they know of the fate of Leal Carl? That was a small boat, I think, that was that may have been pulled ashore in Grytviken, but I can't recall what happened to that.
The only other two I personally know are the Albatross and the I can't even
Petrel.
Petrel, that's it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
those two.
Yeah, there might be somebody in the audience who and I should probably know the answer, but knows what the fate of the Leal Carl was. But if they do, please pop that answer into the chat. Anyway, well, I think that's probably all the questions we have. But I mean, first of all, thanks very much, Norman. That was fantastic. Great to hear all that interesting stuff about the viola and its history. And yeah, really look forward to seeing that. I'll probably take a chance to look at the film again when it becomes available in another place. And yeah, so really good. Thanks for that, and thanks to all the audience this evening. Thanks for some really interesting questions that have challenged us and created some interest. And please, just to finish off by encouraging you all to keep an eye on the South Georgia Association website for further South Georgia Association events, and a reminder to join the association if you're not already members of it. And then just keep an eye out for the next developments from the Viola Trust and the Virtual Viola project.
Yeah, well, thank
any
you.
final words, Norman?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, to South Georgia Association, not just for the opportunity this evening to share it, but also for their contribution towards helping us make this film, which you probably saw when the credits rolled. I like to let the credits roll on that film because there are so many people who've put so much in that it's a shame not to. And South Georgia was right up there at the top, and we give our grateful thanks for that as well.
Great, thank you, Norman, and thanks everybody for a really interesting evening. And yeah, look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.